The Empire was feared across the galaxy. For centuries, it had swept through star systems, crushing anyone who dared to stand against it. Entire planets had fallen before its mighty fleet, their populations wiped out, their cities reduced to nothing but rubble. No one could challenge the Empire's rule. The Emperor, a figure of cold calculation and ruthless ambition, had built this unstoppable force. His commanders were trained to destroy with precision, his soldiers were unmatched in combat, and his warships were the strongest ever built. Every planet in the galaxy knew that resistance was futile. When the Empire came, it was the end. The Empire's fleet was vast, stretching across thousands of star systems, each ship a symbol of absolute power. The Empire's warships were equipped with weapons that could obliterate entire cities with a single shot. They had never lost a battle. Each planet that resisted, each world that refused to bow to the Emperor's rule, was met with destruction. Some tried to flee, but the Empire had perfected the art of tracking and hunting down any who ran. It was a fearsome machine, ruthless and relentless, sweeping across the galaxy with no sign of stopping. On the bridge of one of the Empire's massive warships, Captain Salon watched as their fleet advanced toward a new target. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with the certainty of victory. "We will crush them, just like the others," he muttered, the words more to himself than anyone else. His ship was one of the strongest in the fleet, a massive behemoth with weapons that could turn a planet to dust. The captain had seen it all. He had watched entire civilizations fall before the might of the Empire, and there was no doubt in his mind that this latest world would meet the same fate. The fleet moved in perfect formation, each ship working in unison with the others. They had done this 1,000 times before. Zalon's thoughts drifted as he looked out at the stars. Nothing could stop them. The Empire was invincible, and no one was brave enough to challenge them. Not anymore. Suddenly, the calm silence of the bridge was broken by a loud beep. Zalon turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as the ship's sensor officer reported an anomaly. A small blip appeared on the radar, no larger than a speck. It didn't even register as a threat. It was just a tiny vessel, floating alone in the vast emptiness of space. "Probably just some stranded ship," Zalon said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "There's no need to waste time on it." He turned back to the view ahead, already focusing on the task at hand. But the sensor officer wasn't so quick to dismiss the anomaly. His eyes widened in confusion. "Sir, it's approaching rapidly," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Zalon stood up straighter. He glanced at the readouts again. The tiny vessel was closing in, and it wasn't slowing down. "It must be a mistake," Zalon muttered. "Send a warning shot to scare it off." His order was carried out immediately, and the massive guns of the Empire's warship fired a warning blast, designed to intimidate any ship foolish enough to get too close. The blast lit up the darkness of space, but the small vessel didn't veer away. Instead, it continued its course, coming closer and closer with incredible speed. Zalon's brow furrowed. "What is this?" he muttered. He ordered the sensors to get a closer look. The tiny ship wasn't like anything they had seen before. It wasn't one of their own, and it wasn't from any known race in the galaxy. The readings were strange. Its metal seemed almost indestructible, and its energy signature was unlike anything in the Empire's records. The captain's confidence began to waver, but he quickly shook it off. It was just one ship. How much damage could it do? Without warning, the tiny ship fired back. Zalon's eyes widened as the blast hit the Empire's warship, but it didn't destroy it. Instead, the shot seemed to have an effect on their shields, causing a ripple in their energy field. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the captain pause. "Impossible," he whispered. "How could a ship like that do this?" The vessel's firepower was not supposed to be able to breach the Empire's defenses. "Sir, it's still coming," the sensor officer said, his voice now filled with unease. Zalon gripped the armrest of his chair, his mind racing. The tiny vessel didn't seem to be afraid. It wasn't running from the might of the Empire. In fact, it was acting like it was challenging them. With every passing moment, Zalan's confidence began to erode. He had always been sure that the Empire could not be defeated, that no one could stand against their might. But this little ship, this single vessel, was showing him something he had never expected. Could it be possible that they weren't as invincible as they thought? The human vessel, though small, was proving to be a formidable opponent. And for the first time in his career, Captain Zalan felt something he hadn't in a long time: doubt. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. But even then, he wasn't ready to admit that the Empire could lose to a lone ship. With a steely gaze, Zalan ordered his fleet to advance, confident that the Empire's overwhelming numbers would crush this insignificant challenge. But deep down, something told him that this was different. Something had changed, and the consequences of this encounter would ripple across the galaxy in ways he couldn't yet understand. The tiny human vessel continued to defy the Empire's expectations. The battle had begun, but the Empire's fleet was still confident. After all, they had fought countless battles, and no one had ever stood a chance against them. The Empire's warships were designed to overpower anything that came their way. They had the most advanced technology, the most skilled crews, and the strongest weapons. But this tiny ship, barely a speck in the vastness of space, was showing them something different. Captain Zalan watched in disbelief as the small vessel dodged their attacks with remarkable precision. It wasn't just the way it moved, it was how it fought back. The human ship's weapons were far more advanced than Zalan had anticipated. Its blasts were sharp and focused, capable of making the Empire's shield systems flicker and even tear. For a moment, Zalan was sure it was a fluke, a random occurrence. Surely, one lucky shot couldn't harm them. But as the battle wore on, it became clear that this wasn't luck. The human ship's shots were calculated, its movements strategic. It seemed to anticipate the Empire's next move, dodging and weaving through the massive warships with ease. Zalan couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could this be happening? "Target that ship," he ordered, his voice rising with frustration. The Empire's fleet, hundreds of ships strong, fired relentlessly. Yet every shot that came close to the human vessel either missed or was deflected by the ship's unexplainable shields. This was no ordinary ship. Zalan had no idea what he was up against, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. The sensor officer, his face pale, reported more troubling news. "The human ship is pulling ahead, sir. It's breaking through our defenses faster than expected." The officer's hands shook as he manipulated the controls, but no matter what they tried, the human ship seemed to be everywhere at once, never staying in one place long enough for them to get a lock on it. The battle was becoming chaotic. The Empire's precision, once a hallmark of its power, was faltering. Ships were firing blindly now, trying to hit something they couldn't even track. The human ship wasn't just outmaneuvering them, it was outsmarting them. One of the Empire's ships, a destroyer on the right flank, exploded in a massive ball of fire. Zalan's eyes widened as debris scattered across the field. The human vessel had done it. In a single, perfect shot, it had taken down one of their strongest ships. The captain's heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be happening. How could a single ship take down a destroyer so easily? The Empire's once unquestioned supremacy was crumbling before his eyes. Zalan clenched his fists, his mind racing. He ordered the fleet to surround the human ship, hoping that sheer numbers would overwhelm it. The plan was simple: close in, trap the human vessel, and destroy it with overwhelming firepower. But again, the human ship proved too clever. It darted in and out of the oncoming fleet, finding gaps between the warships and using the Empire's own ships as shields. For every move the Empire made, the human vessel responded with deadly efficiency. The gap between them was closing, but instead of retreating, the human ship continued to push forward, its weapons pounding the Empire's ships from angles they hadn't expected. As the battle raged on, something strange began to happen. The Empire's fleet wasn't just losing ships, they were losing confidence. Some commanders started to doubt their orders, questioning whether they could win. The previously flawless unity of the fleet began to break down. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Were they truly going to lose to a single human ship? The Empire's forces were vast, but their morale was starting to falter. As the hours ticked by, the human vessel seemed to grow bolder. Every strike it made was more precise, more calculated. The Empire's attacks were no longer meeting their targets, and in the chaos, their numbers began to thin. Zalan's face twisted in anger. He had led countless campaigns, but never had he seen a battle like this. "I don't care what it takes," he muttered under his breath. "This ship will fall." He slammed his fist down on the armrest, his mind consumed with frustration. No matter what he did, the human vessel seemed to be one step ahead. It was as if the ship had a mind of its own, a force that wasn't bound by the rules of combat that the Empire had mastered. And then, just when Zalan thought he had regained control of the situation, the human ship fired again. This time, it wasn't a simple shot. It was a devastating burst of energy that hit the heart of the fleet. The Empire's warships shook violently as the blast tore through their defenses. The damage was catastrophic. One by one, the ships started to lose power, and some even exploded on impact. Panic began to spread throughout the fleet. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a desperate fight for survival. Zalan's eyes widened in shock. He had never imagined such a thing was possible. The human ship wasn't just an annoyance. It was a genuine threat. The Empire, with all its might, was being pushed to the brink by a single vessel. The feeling of invincibility that had once defined the Empire was slipping away, and in its place, a sense of fear began to take root. The captain gritted his teeth. This battle wasn't over, but for the first time, he wasn't sure if the Empire could win. And that thought, more than anything, made him realize how much had changed in the galaxy. The Empire was no longer the unstoppable force it had once been. And the human vessel, it was something the Empire had never faced before. The battle continued, but the tide was turning. Captain Zalan's mind raced as he watched the destruction unfold. The human vessel had already taken down several of the Empire's most powerful ships, and its relentless attacks had left the once mighty fleet in disarray. The Empire, for the first time in its long history, was fighting a battle it might lose. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, but now it faced a new kind of enemy, one that wasn't afraid to fight back, one that didn't follow the same rules of warfare they had grown accustomed to. On the bridge, the atmosphere was tense. The officers and soldiers who had once stood proud and unshaken were now uneasy. They watched as their once perfect formations began to fall apart. The Empire's warships, which had been designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies, were now scrambling to protect themselves from the human ship's unpredictable tactics. Zalan clenched his fists in frustration, refusing to believe that this was happening. He had been a part of the Empire for years, and in all that time, he had never once seen their power challenged in this way. He ordered his fleet to regroup. The human ship had done enough damage. They needed to focus their firepower and crush it once and for all. Yet, despite his orders, something felt wrong. The human ship didn't act like any of the Empire's previous enemies. It wasn't just attacking. They were learning. It was as if the human vessel was studying their every move, calculating every weakness, and finding ways to exploit them. Zalan took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He couldn't let fear take hold. He had been in situations like this before, where the odds seemed impossible. The Empire had always emerged victorious, no matter how bleak things looked. But something about this felt different. The human ship had something that the Empire had never encountered before: resolve. A will to fight, not just for survival, but for something greater. As the battle stretched on, the Empire began to realize that this wasn't just a lone ship. The human vessel wasn't working alone. The more Zalan thought about it, the more it became clear this was part of something much bigger. The small ship was a symbol. It had come to show that the Empire's grip on the galaxy could be challenged. It wasn't just a military attack. It was a message. But who could the captain be? Who was this person, this human, leading the charge against the Empire's mighty forces? Captain Zalon had spent his entire life within the Empire, rising through the ranks to his current position. He had witnessed the downfall of countless civilizations, all of them bowing to the Emperor's will. He had seen his share of rebellions, uprisings, and revolts, but none had ever posed a real threat. They were always crushed before they could truly begin. This, however, was different. The small human ship that had appeared out of nowhere wasn't just a soldier, it was a strategist. It was capable of seeing the Empire's weaknesses, things that Zalon had never even considered. How was it possible that a single vessel could understand their military strategies so deeply, exploit their tactics so effectively? The more he thought about it, the more he realized the impossible truth. This ship wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting to end the Empire's reign once and for all. As the human vessel tore through the fleet, Captain Zalon began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. It wasn't fear of losing a battle. It was fear of what was at stake. If this ship was part of a larger rebellion, if it was a symbol of something much greater, then the Empire's time at the top might finally be coming to an end. The thought of the Empire's dominance slipping away was something Zalon couldn't bear to think about. But it wasn't just the human ship's weaponry or tactics that had him rattled. It was the conviction behind it. The humans weren't just fighting to protect their own kind. They were fighting to end the tyranny the Empire had spread across the galaxy. Deep down, Zalon knew that this battle was more than just a fight for power. It was a fight for freedom. For the first time, he began to understand why the human vessel wouldn't back down. The Empire had spread across the stars, but it had done so with cruelty and oppression. Perhaps this lone human ship was the beginning of something much larger, a spark that could ignite a fire of rebellion across the galaxy. The realization hit Zalon hard. For the first time, he saw his own empire as the villain. He had spent his life serving the Emperor, carrying out orders without question, believing in the Empire's cause. But now, as he watched the human ship continue to outmaneuver them, the truth was inescapable. The human captain, this lone fighter, wasn't just an enemy. They were the embodiment of hope for the oppressed, the spark of defiance that had the power to bring the entire empire to its knees. Zalon clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the armrests of his command chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He couldn't let this happen. The Empire had spent centuries building its power. The thought of everything it had worked for crumbling because of a single ship made his stomach churn with rage and fear. He couldn't let it end like this. But deep down in the pit of his stomach, he knew that the Empire's time was running out. And the human vessel, this small, resilient ship, was leading the way. The battle reached a critical point. The Empire's fleet had been pushed to its limits, and Captain Zalon's worst fears were coming true. The human vessel was not only holding its ground, it was slowly, relentlessly, and methodically dismantling their once imposing fleet. The tide of the battle had shifted, and the Empire's might, once seen as invincible, now seemed fragile. The small human ship was proving to be far more than an annoyance. It was a force that could potentially change the galaxy forever. Zalon's eyes never left the viewports. The destruction was unfolding before him at an alarming rate. One by one, the Empire's warships fell, their shields failing as the human ship's precise blasts hit their weak points. Zalon had tried to rally his fleet, ordering them to focus their fire on the human vessel, but it was no use. The ship seemed to anticipate every move, every strategy. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, it vanished, as if the human captain was always one step ahead. Zalon gritted his teeth. This wasn't just about winning the battle anymore. It was about survival. He couldn't afford to lose this fight. The entire empire depended on this victory, but the longer the battle dragged on, the more it became clear that they were losing. The human ship's captain wasn't just outwitting them. He was showing the galaxy that the Empire wasn't unbeatable. That thought filled Zalon with a dread he had never experienced before. The Empire had never been challenged like this. Every war, every campaign had been a testament to their superiority. But now, in the middle of the vast emptiness of space, the tide was turning, and the galaxy was watching. The human vessel was not alone in this fight. As the human ship continued to strike at the Empire's fleet, reports came in from other star systems. The word was spreading. The rebellion was growing. The human vessel had become a symbol of hope, and every passing moment added fuel to the fire. Planets that had once been silent, that had cowered under the Empire's boot, were now rising up. Zalon knew that if they didn't end this now, the galaxy would be engulfed in rebellion. "Regroup. Focus all fire on that ship," Zalon shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. But even as the words left his mouth, the human ship fired again, this time directly at the command ship leading the Empire's fleet. The shot hit with such force that the entire warship shook violently, throwing officers and crew to the ground. Sparks flew from the control panels, and alarms blared as the ship's systems began to fail. It was a direct hit to their power core, and the damage was severe. The warship listed to one side, and Zalon's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. They were losing. The Empire, the force that had swept across the stars for centuries, was losing to a single ship. "Get us back online," Zalon barked, his voice frantic. "We can't fall apart now." But there was no use. The damage was too extensive. The systems were failing, and the human ship was already moving in for another attack. The once proud Empire's fleet was breaking down, unable to defend against the human vessel's relentless assault. The Empire's advanced technology was no match for the cunning of the human ship. The Empire had always relied on strength and numbers. But this fight was different. It was no longer just about firepower. It was about ingenuity, strategy, and the will to fight for something greater. The final blow came quickly. The human vessel fired again, hitting the heart of the Empire's fleet. Zalon watched helplessly as warship after warship fell, their once pristine forms disintegrating into nothing more than burning wreckage. The Empire's command ship, the one Zalon had fought so hard to protect, was now nothing more than a drifting hulk. The human ship's message was clear. The Empire's time had come to an end. Zalon stood on the bridge, watching the destruction unfold around him. The sound of alarms, the flashing red lights, it was all too much to process. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do. He had always been confident in the Empire's strength, in its ability to crush anything that stood in its way. But now he realized how fragile their dominance had been. They had built their empire on fear and control, but now, in the face of a lone human vessel, that foundation was crumbling. We have to retreat," Zalon muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. It was the only option left. The fleet was gone, the Empire's dominance shattered. And yet, as he gave the order for the remaining ships to fall back, a part of him couldn't help but feel something else, a sense of awe. Despite everything, despite the overwhelming odds, the human vessel had fought for something more than survival. It had fought for freedom. And in doing so, it had ignited a spark that would forever change the galaxy. As the surviving ships of the Empire turned to retreat, the human ship stood victorious. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The rebellion had found its symbol, its leader, and its hope. And the Empire, it had lost its grip on the galaxy, its once unstoppable forces now broken and retreating into the dark corners of space. The galaxy would never be the same again. The retreat of the Empire's fleet left an eerie silence in its wake. The once mighty warships that had filled the skies with fire and chaos now drifted aimlessly, some severely damaged, others completely destroyed. Captain Zalon stood alone on the bridge of what remained of the Empire's flagship, staring at the view screen, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. The Empire had always believed that their rule was eternal, that nothing could stand in their way. And yet, a single human vessel had torn apart their invincible fleet. Zalon's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. His anger was almost palpable, but it was quickly mixed with something else. Fear. For the first time in his life, he felt vulnerable. He had led countless campaigns, crushed hundreds of rebellions. But this was different. This human ship wasn't just an enemy. It was a symbol that the Empire could be challenged, that their reign wasn't as unshakable as they had always believed. The humans had proven that the Empire's power could be broken, and now word was spreading across the galaxy. News of the battle was already being broadcasted from the farthest corners of the galaxy. Rebellions that had once cowered in the shadows were now emboldened, and the Empire was already losing control of the systems they had once ruled with iron fists. On the surface of the distant planet Coral, a once quiet world under the Empire's boot, citizens gathered in secret. Their whispers filled the air as they listened to the broadcasts of the human victory. The message was clear. A single ship had brought down the Empire's might. The fight for freedom, once thought impossible, was now within reach. The victory of the lone human vessel had ignited something powerful, something unstoppable. The people of Coral and countless other planets were no longer afraid. Back in the heart of the Empire, in the grand cold chambers of the Emperor's palace, a grim reality settled in. The Emperor, who had once been the supreme ruler of the galaxy, now faced a growing threat. His spies and generals were reporting widespread unrest. Rebellions, uprisings, and insurgencies were cropping up across the stars. The human ship had shown the galaxy that the Empire was not invincible. It had shattered the myth of their unchallenged supremacy. And now, it seemed as though the Empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. The Emperor sat at his throne, a cold and calculating figure, yet even his icy demeanor couldn't mask the anxiety that had taken root within him. The galaxy he had spent decades controlling, shaping, and conquering was slipping away. He knew that this was just the beginning. The human ship was the spark that had ignited a fire, one that was spreading rapidly, and it seemed there was no way to stop it. "Have you received word from Zalon?" the Emperor asked, his voice low and filled with barely contained fury. His chief advisor, standing at attention, hesitated before answering. "Captain Zalon has failed, Your Majesty. The human ship, it defeated the fleet. The remnants of the fleet are in retreat," the advisor said, his voice trembling under the Emperor's cold gaze. "Impossible," the Emperor shouted, slamming his fist down onto the armrest of his throne. The throne room, once filled with power and dominance, now seemed strangely hollow. How could a single vessel do this? Who is commanding it? "We don't know, sire. Our intelligence reports that it's a human, but beyond that, there is little information. It's as if this ship has some kind of otherworldly understanding of our tactics." The Emperor's face twisted in anger and frustration. "Find them. I don't care what it takes. We will hunt down this human and make them pay for this humiliation. The galaxy will remain under our control." As the Emperor raged, his advisors looked nervously at one another. Even they could see that the Empire was beginning to unravel. They could feel the shift in power. The Emperor's once unquestioned authority was now in question. The rebellion had taken root, and the Empire's enemies were no longer fighting with fear. They were fighting with hope. Back on the human vessel, the crew was celebrating. Their victory was more than just a military one. It was symbolic of something far greater. The human captain, whose name had already spread through the galaxy, knew that this victory was just the beginning. They had proven that the Empire could be beaten, that the oppressed peoples of the galaxy could rise up and fight back. The human captain, standing at the helm of the vessel, looked out into the vastness of space. There was still so much to be done. This victory had shown that the galaxy could be free of the Empire's rule, but there were still battles to fight, systems to liberate, and enemies to face. But now, the people knew that the Empire was not invincible, and that, above all, was what mattered. The small human ship, which had once been nothing more than a single vessel, had become the spark that ignited a revolution. The human captain knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be losses, there would be challenges, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. And in that hope, the galaxy had found its new leaders. The Empire's reign was over, and the rebellion had just begun. As the human ship sailed toward the next battle, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, for they were no longer under the shadow of the Empire. The fight for freedom had only just begun.